Look up! I said, look at me.
In the heart of global power, inside Rome's Palatine Palace, there was one rule: to see the emperor. You were forbidden from meeting his gaze, because to look directly at Emperor Gaius Caesar Germanicus, the man history calls Caligula, was to look upon a living god, and gods do not like to be scrutinized by mortals. He didn't just call himself a god, he believed it. He built extravagant bridges to consult with his brother, the god Jupiter. He ordered the gods themselves to be remade in his own image, a golden, life-sized statue, housed in its own temple, that was dressed each day in the exact same clothes he was wearing. The Senate, the men who were once the pride of the Republic, now had to compete for the honor of serving as priests in the cult of Caligula. They offered the most lavish sacrifices to appease a god who, just a few years earlier, they had hailed as a savior. But this is not the story of a god. It's the story of a fracture. Rome didn't just get an emperor they feared. They lost a son they loved. How did that cherished son become the monster who demanded worship and reveled in cruelty? What broke Caligula? Before the monster, there was a myth. Before the self-proclaimed god, there was the people's darling. To understand the fracture, you must first understand what was broken. You must understand the hope that Caligula once inspired. He rose to power from the ashes of a dark and suffocating time. The reign of his predecessor, Tiberius, had smothered Rome in a fog of paranoia. The city was paralyzed by treason trials, where a network of spies and informants turned private conversations into public accusations. Senators feared dinner invitations, and a misplaced word could lead to exile or a quiet order to take one's own life. A joyless gloom had settled over the empire, and then came Gaius, young, handsome, and the living embodiment of Rome's greatest hero, his father, Germanicus. He wasn't just an heir, he was a symbol of renewal. They didn't even call him by his formal name. They called him Caligula, Little Boot, an affectionate nickname given to him decades earlier by the legions his father commanded. They remembered the image of a small boy in a miniature soldier's uniform, marching proudly among giants, a mascot for the entire Roman army. He was their army's child, their nation's son, and for a brief, shining moment, he delivered on that promise. His first act was to end the reign of fear. He publicly burned the records of the treason trials, declaring an end to the paranoia. The city could breathe again. He recalled the exiles banished by Tiberius, reuniting families torn apart by the old regime. He paid generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, winning their unshakable loyalty, and he brought joy back to the heart of the empire. After years of austerity, he sponsored lavish gladiatorial games, chariot races, and theatrical plays, paying for them from his own vast treasury. The roar of the crowd returned to the Circus Maximus, a sound of pure celebration. For 7 glorious months, Caligula was not just an emperor. He was the answer to Rome's prayers. So where did the fracture begin? What sickness could shatter a promise so bright and turn a beloved savior into the very monster from their nightmares? The Golden Age lasted less than a year. Then, in the autumn of 37 AD, the promise began to crack. The young emperor, the darling of Rome, fell gravely ill with what ancient sources describe as a brain fever. The empire held its breath. The city that had just learned to celebrate again was now gripped by collective terror. Temples overflowed with citizens making sacrifices across the empire. People publicly pledged their own lives to the gods if only Caligula would be spared. They had just found their savior. They could not bear to lose him. But as the empire prayed for his body, Caligula's mind was suffering its own separate sickness, a crucible of fever and grief. For in the haze of his delirium, he lost the person he cherished most, his sister, Drusilla. Their bond was unnaturally close, an obsessive affection that scandalized even Roman society. He had worshipped her in life. She was his confidant, his anchor. Now she was gone. And then, a miracle, Caligula recovered. The fever broke, and he rose from his sick bed. The empire rejoiced. But the man who returned to them was not the one they had lost. The warmth was gone. The easy smile was replaced by a cruel, empty sneer. The light in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a chilling intensity. For 2,000 years, historians have asked, what happened in that fever? Did the illness physically damage his brain, shattering his sanity? Or did the crushing grief of losing Drusilla curl into a paranoid rage against the world that had taken her from him? Perhaps it was both. A perfect storm of sickness and sorrow that drowned the hero and unleashed the monster. The first to feel the chill of this new reign was a man who had offered his life for the emperoress. During the illness, a senator had publicly vowed to commit suicide if Caligula recovered. A grand gesture of loyalty. Now, Caligula summoned him. He didn't thank the senator for his devotion. He ordered him to fulfill his vow. He forced the man to kill himself, not as a sacrifice, but as a twisted punchline to a cosmic joke. The promise was shattered. The golden age was over. The beloved son of Rome was gone. And in his place stood a king who saw enemies in every shadow and traitors in every friend. Rome's savior was dead. Now they would meet their monster. With the last remnants of his old self gone, the imperial palace transformed. It was no longer the center of government. It was a theater for one man's escalating madness. Caligula's tyranny would not be one of quiet, backroom cruelty. It was a spectacle, a public performance designed to prove not only that he was emperor, but that he was the sole author of reality itself. His reign became a relentless assault on Rome's three most sacred pillars: its political dignity, its connection to the gods, and the honor of its families. His first target was the pride of the Republic, the Roman Senate. He systematically dismantled their dignity, the dignitas that was more precious than life. To a Roman nobleman, this was not just punishment. It was a form of psychological torture. He forced these powerful, aged men to run beside his chariot like common slaves, their robes dragging in the dust, their lungs burning, all for his private amusement. He would address them as men in togas, a subtle but deep insult, reducing them from individuals to a faceless uniform. But simple humiliation was not enough for his theatrical cruelty. He needed absurdity, an act so insane it would break their spirit completely. He invited the Senate to a formal dinner, not with him, but with his horse. They were forced to sit in silence as inside Titus was served delicacies on golden plates, while they were given lesser fare. Caligula, acting as host, would make toasts to the horses' health, asking the senators to applaud. This was an exercise in power. He was testing them, seeing how much degradation they would endure. And then, in his ultimate act of contempt, Caligula announced his intention to make the horse a consul, the highest office in Rome. The senators, trapped between terror and absurdity, reportedly burst into forced, nervous laughter. The message was clear. Their ancient honors, their entire social structure, meant less to him than his horse's comfort. His attack on political dignity was complete. Next, he would attack the gods. His war was not just on tradition, but on logic and nature itself, to disprove a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. He did exactly that. He bankrupted the treasury, requisitioning thousands of merchant ships from across the empire. The act crippled supply lines, causing a grain shortage in Rome and sparking riots among the starving populace. But the suffering of his people was irrelevant. All that mattered was the spectacle. For 2 days, he paraded back and forth across his impossible creation, a king play-acting in his own fantasy. This delusion of conquering the natural world reached its peak on the shores of the English Channel. After assembling his army as if to invade Britain, he declared war. On the sea itself, he commanded his legions, the most feared fighting force in the world, to attack the god Neptune. After the battle, he ordered his soldiers to collect seashells as the spoils of war. He called it plunder from a defeated god, and planned to parade it through Rome in a grand triumph, a mockery of the city's most sacred military tradition. Having declared himself a god and defeated another, his assault on religion was complete. All that remained was his assault on the family. But if his public acts were bizarre theatrical productions, his private life descended into a realm of pure, methodical sadism. He turned wings of the imperial palace into a high-class brothel, not for pleasure, but as another instrument of humiliation. Staffed by the wives and daughters of the very senators he despised, he acted as the pimp, setting the prices and keeping meticulous ledgers of the transactions as if it were a state-run business. This was an attack on the Roman concept of pudicitia, or female modesty, a cornerstone of family honor. Then, in an act of supreme psychological cruelty, he would dine with the husbands, providing a graphic, humiliating critique of their wives' performances in bed, asking them to comment on their own. Shame, silence was not an option. They had to participate in their own degradation. His cruelty was as random as it was absolute, and often it was tied to his greed. When the state treasury ran dry from his expenditures, he invented new ways to steal from his subjects. He implemented absurd taxes on lawsuits, on food, on porters, even on prostitution. He would accuse wealthy citizens of treason on fabricated charges, seize their estates, and then use their own money to fund his next spectacle. His most monstrous invention, however, was a unique form of torture reserved for grieving fathers. He would force wealthy fathers to attend the executions of their own sons. Immediately after, he would summon the grieving father to the palace for a feast. The man was expected to laugh, to drink, to enjoy the entertainment, all while the image of his dead son was burned into his mind. Caligula would watch him closely all night for any sign of sadness. A single tear, a moment of silence, would have been interpreted as disrespect to the emperor and would have meant the father's own death. He was a collector of suffering. He looked upon the people who had once adored him and uttered the words that would immortalize his tyranny. "I wish the Roman people had but one neck," he said, "so that I might slit it in a single blow." He no longer just wanted their fear. He wanted their annihilation. He had attacked their pride, their treasury, their gods, their families, and their very sanity. His reign had become a playground for a broken god. But there is a limit even to Roman tolerance. The men who were once forced to applaud his madness were now secretly rehearsing his death. How long could the elite of the world's greatest empire suffer a madman on the throne? How long before fear turned into a dagger in the dark? Fear, when pushed to its absolute limit, does not remain fear. It transforms. It hardens into resolve. In the shadowy corridors of the palace, the whispers of terrified senators began to coalesce into a single, deadly plan, but they needed an instrument of vengeance, and they found one in Caligula's own guard.
Sharia, such a powerful display. One might almost forget your delicate sensibilities.
Tell me, Commander, what is the password for today? Is it butterfly or perhaps dandelion?
The leader of the plot was Cassius Sharia, a veteran soldier whose loyalty had been repaid with relentless public mockery. Caligula constantly taunted him for his high-pitched voice. For Sharia, this was not just about saving Rome from a tyrant. It was about reclaiming his honor, one wound at a time. The day of the assassination was January 24, 41 AD. The conspirators were on edge. Their plan was to strike Caligula as he left the games, but the emperor lingered for hours. The assassins waited, their nerves fraying, believing their chance was lost. But then Caligula's uncle, Claudius, convinced him to retire to his palace for lunch. The emperor chose to take a private, underground passageway. It was the moment Sharia had been waiting for. In the narrow corridor, Sharia approached the emperor to distract him. He asked for the day's password. Caligula, ever the mocker, sneered and gave a vulgar, insulting reply related to Sharia's supposed effeminacy. Sharia's face hardened. He had endured his last humiliation, hockage. He reportedly yelled, "Do this," and struck the first blow, slashing Caligula's neck and shoulder. The emperor was stunned, but not dead. He cried out, "I am still alive," and tried to flee. But the other conspirators swarmed him, a whirlwind of vengeful fury. One conspirator, Sabinus, drove a sword through his chest. Another stabbed him in the face. It was an explosion of personal hatred. The historical accounts claim more than 30 wounds, each one a release of years of pent-up fear and humiliation. Caligula, the living god, died on the cold stone floor of a service tunnel, his final words lost in a chorus of screams. The conspirators' bloody work was not finished. A tyrant's legacy lives on through his heirs. They rushed to the imperial apartments. There, a centurion murdered Caligula's wife, Caesonia, without hesitation. His infant daughter, Julia Drusilla, a child named for the sister he had so loved. was taken by the legs, and her head was smashed against a stone wall.
And so, with tyranny slain, we shall restore the glorious liberty of our ancestors. The Republic is reborn.
While blood flowed in the palace, the Senate convened, deluding themselves that their moment had come. But the city was in the hands of the army, and in the palace a soldier, roaming through the deserted halls, noticed a curtain tremble. But the soldier, Gratus, instead of killing him, stared for a long moment, a realization dawning on his face. He knelt and hailed him as the new emperor, the Praetorian Guard quickly realized that the power to choose an emperor was now theirs. A restored republic meant they would be out of a job. They wanted a ruler they could control. And so, the ultimate irony. The plot to kill a tyrant in the name of freedom ended with the accidental creation of the next emperor. The conspirators had succeeded in killing a man, but they had failed to kill the system that gave him his power. Cassius Sharia, the man who dreamed of being a liberator, was himself executed by the new emperor he had inadvertently created. This was Caligula's true, lasting legacy, not his madness, but the precedent set by his death. He was the first Roman emperor to be assassinated by his own court. His fall proved that the throne could be taken by violence, a bloody lesson that would be repeated for centuries. The 4 years of his reign were a fevered dream of horror, but the consequences would haunt Rome long after he was gone. They killed the monster, but in doing so, they unleashed a new plague upon the empire. The age of the assassin emperor had just begun. The story of Caligula is more than a tale of a single mad emperor. It is a timeless warning about the nature of absolute power, the fragility of political systems, and the terrifying speed at which a society can trade freedom for security, only to lose both. The cycle of power, corruption, and violence is a central theme of history. Where do you see echoes of this story in the world today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these stories from the past are essential to understanding our present, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history.